The Apache people were not a single tribe, but a collection of culturally related groups who lived in the Southwest for centuries. They were composed of several bands, each with its own distinct leadership and territory. Yet they shared common linguistic and cultural traits. The Apache way of life was deeply intertwined with the land they inhabited, a vast and diverse region that provided them with everything they needed to survive and thrive. Their territory stretched across what is now Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of northern Mexico. This expansive area included deserts, mountains, and plains, each offering unique resources and challenges. The Apaches were masters of their environment, using their intimate knowledge of the land to navigate and utilize its resources effectively. The Apaches were skilled hunters and warriors, adapted to the rugged and unforgiving landscape. They hunted game such as deer and rabbits and gathered wild plants and herbs. Their prowess in battle was well known, and they developed sophisticated strategies and tactics to defend their territory from intruders. They lived off the land, relying on their deep knowledge of the desert and mountains to survive. The Apaches were adept at finding water sources in the arid environment and knew which plants could be used for food, medicine, and other purposes. Their survival skills were passed down through generations, ensuring the continuity of their way of life. For centuries, the Apaches had lived in relative peace. Their communities were close-knit, with strong family ties and a deep sense of tradition. They engaged in trade with neighboring tribes and maintained a balanced relationship with their environment. Life was not without its hardships, but the Apaches had developed a resilient culture that allowed them to endure. Their world began to change dramatically with the arrival of European colonizers. The Spanish were the first to make contact, driven by a quest for gold and a desire to spread Christianity. This marked the beginning of a new and tumultuous era for the Apache people. The Spanish, seeking gold and converts to Christianity, were the first to encroach on Apache lands. They established missions and settlements, often forcibly converting Native Americans to their faith. The Apaches, however, were not easily subdued and resisted these efforts fiercely. Clashes between the two groups were frequent and often violent. The Apaches used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, launching guerrilla-style attacks on Spanish forces. These conflicts were brutal and left a lasting impact on both sides. The Apaches fiercely resisted the Spanish attempts to control their territory and their way of life. They fought to protect their homes, their families, and their cultural heritage. Despite the Spanish military's superior weaponry, the Apaches' determination and tactical ingenuity made them formidable opponents. The arrival of Mexicans in the 19th century brought new challenges. After Mexico gained independence from Spain, Mexican settlers began to move into Apache territories, leading to further conflicts over land and resources. Mexico had won its independence from Spain, but conflicts with the Apaches continued. The Mexican government attempted to exert control over the region, but the Apaches remained defiant, continuing their resistance against any form of encroachment. Mexican settlers and Apache bands competed for resources and land. The Apaches conducted raids on settlements to acquire supplies, while settlers sought to defend their new homes. This ongoing struggle created a volatile and dangerous frontier environment. Raids and reprisals became a tragic part of life on the frontier. The cycle of violence perpetuated a state of constant tension and insecurity, affecting both the Apaches and the settlers. Each side sought to protect their interests, leading to a seemingly endless series of confrontations. The arrival of the United States in the Southwest in the 1840s marked a turning point. American expansionism brought new pressures and challenges to the region as settlers and soldiers moved westward, encroaching further into Apache lands. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ended the Mexican-American War, ceded vast new territories to the United States, including traditional Apache lands. This treaty significantly altered the political landscape, bringing the Apaches into direct conflict with a new and powerful nation. The Apaches now faced a new and powerful adversary, one that would change their world forever. The United States government and military were determined to assert control over the newly acquired territories, leading to a series of conflicts that would have profound and lasting effects on the Apache people and their way of life. The United States, eager to assert its control over its new territories, sought to subdue the Apaches. This was a time of great expansion and ambition for the young nation, which saw the vast lands of the Southwest as ripe for settlement and development. The Apaches, however, had called these lands home for generations, and they were not willing to give them up without a fight. The U.S. Army established a presence in the Southwest, building forts and increasing patrols. These forts served as both a deterrent to Apache raids and a base of operations for military campaigns. The soldiers stationed there were tasked with protecting settlers and maintaining order, but their presence also symbolized the encroaching power of the U.S. government. The discovery of gold in California in 1849 brought a flood of prospectors and settlers through Apache lands, further escalating tensions. These newcomers, driven by dreams of wealth and opportunity, often disregarded the rights and territories of the indigenous peoples. Their arrival disrupted the traditional ways of life for the Apaches, leading to increased conflict and competition for resources. The Apaches, facing encroachment on their hunting grounds and sacred sites, responded with raids. These raids were not just acts of aggression, but also a means of survival. By targeting the settlers' livestock and supplies, the Apaches aimed to weaken their adversaries and reclaim some measure of control over their lands. These raids, often targeting livestock and supplies, were a means of survival and a way to strike back at the settlers who threatened their way of life. The Apaches were skilled warriors, adept at using the terrain to their advantage. Their knowledge of the land allowed them to launch swift and effective attacks, often catching their enemies off guard. The U.S. Army retaliated with force, launching punitive expeditions against Apache bands. These expeditions were intended to punish the Apaches for their raids and to demonstrate the might of the U.S. military. However, the rugged terrain and the Apaches' guerrilla tactics made these campaigns difficult and costly. The early clashes between the Apaches and the U.S. Army were marked by misunderstanding and brutality. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the conflict only served to deepen the animosity between them. The Apaches fought to defend their homeland, while the U.S. soldiers believed they were bringing civilization to a wild and untamed land. The Apaches, with their deep knowledge of the land and their guerrilla tactics, proved to be elusive enemies. They used the harsh desert environment to their advantage, launching surprise attacks and then disappearing into the rugged landscape. This made it difficult for the U.S. Army to achieve a decisive victory. The U.S. Army, often unfamiliar with the terrain and the Apache way of war, struggled to gain the upper hand. The soldiers were trained for conventional warfare, not the hit-and-run tactics employed by the Apaches. This mismatch in strategies led to a prolonged and grueling conflict. Despite their fierce resistance, the Apaches faced overwhelming odds. The U.S. government was determined to secure its hold on the Southwest, and it had the resources and manpower to sustain a long-term campaign. The Apaches, on the other hand, were fighting for their very survival, with limited resources and support. The U.S. government, determined to secure its hold on the Southwest, poured resources into the conflict. Reinforcements and supplies were sent to the region, and new strategies were developed to counter the Apache threat. The sheer scale of the U.S. military effort was daunting for the Apache warriors. The Apaches, outnumbered and outgunned, fought a desperate battle for their survival. They were determined to protect their land and their way of life, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Their courage and tenacity became legendary, but the odds were stacked against them. The stage was set for a long and bloody conflict, one that would become known as the Apache Wars. This struggle would leave a lasting impact on the history of the American Southwest, shaping the destinies of both the Apache people and the settlers who sought to claim their land. The tensions between the Apaches and the Americans reached a boiling point in 1861 with the Bascom Affair. This event, a tragic misunderstanding fueled by suspicion and prejudice, would have far-reaching consequences, igniting 2 decades of warfare. It began with the kidnapping of a young boy, Felix Ward, from a ranch near Fort Buchanan in Arizona. The blame fell upon Cochise, leader of the Chiricahua Apache band, although his involvement was never proven. Lieutenant George Bascom, a young and inexperienced officer, was tasked with recovering the boy. Bascom summoned Cochise and his party to a meeting under a flag of truce. He intended to hold them hostage until the boy was returned. However, Cochise, unaware of his role in the kidnapping or perhaps sensing treachery, denied involvement. the situation escalated into violence. Cochise, feeling trapped, slashed his way out of the tent with his knife. In the ensuing chaos, shots were fired, and several men on both sides were killed or wounded. Cochise escaped, but Bascom retaliated by executing several Apache hostages. The Bascom affair poisoned relations between the Apaches and the Americans. Cochise, seeking revenge for the betrayal and the deaths of his kinsmen, went to war. His fury, shared by many Apaches, ignited a conflict that would rage for years to come. Cochise, his name forever linked to the Bascom affair, became a symbol of Apache resistance. This pivotal event in 1861, where Cochise was falsely accused of kidnapping, ignited a fierce conflict between the Apache and the United States Army. The Bascom affair marked the beginning of a long and arduous struggle for the Apache people, with Cochise at the forefront. A skilled warrior and a shrewd tactician, he led his people in a relentless guerrilla war against the Americans. His leadership was characterized by his ability to inspire and unite the Apache warriors, who were known for their fierce independence. Cochise's strategies were not just about brute force. They involved careful planning, deep knowledge of the terrain, and an understanding of his enemy's weaknesses. His knowledge of the rugged landscape and his ability to exploit its natural defenses made him a formidable adversary. The southwestern terrain, with its rocky outcrops and hidden valleys, provided the perfect backdrop for his guerrilla tactics. Cochise and his warriors could strike swiftly and then vanish into the landscape, leaving their pursuers bewildered and frustrated. For over a decade, Cochise and his warriors waged war against the U.S. Army and encroaching settlers. This prolonged conflict saw numerous skirmishes, ambushes, and raids, each one a testament to Cochise's determination to protect his people's way of life. The Apaches' resistance was not just a fight for survival, but a fight for their land, their culture, and their freedom. They raided settlements, ambushed patrols, and made travel through their territory perilous. The Apaches' ability to move swiftly and strike unexpectedly made them a constant threat to the settlers and soldiers alike. These tactics were not just about inflicting damage, but also about sending a clear message. The Apache would not be easily subdued. Cochise's name became synonymous with fear and respect among both his enemies and his allies. His reputation as a fierce warrior spread far and wide, and his ability to lead and inspire his people earned him a place of honor among the Apache. Even those who opposed him could not help but admire his tenacity and skill. However, Cochise was not solely a man of war. He was also a leader who understood the importance of peace and the well-being of his people. He knew that endless conflict would only bring more suffering, and that a time would come when peace would be necessary for the survival of the Apache. He also understood the need for peace and the preservation of his people. Cochise was a visionary who could see beyond the immediate battles to the long-term future of his tribe. He engaged in discussions with other Apache leaders, always seeking ways to protect and preserve their way of life. In 1871, after years of fighting, he agreed to meet with General Oliver O. Howard, a man known for his compassion and his efforts to find peaceful solutions. This meeting was a turning point, as both men recognized the futility of continued bloodshed and the potential for a peaceful resolution. Cochise agreed to peace on his own terms. He was not a man to surrender easily, and his conditions for peace reflected his desire to ensure the safety and autonomy of his people. The negotiations were tough, but Cochise's determination and Howard's understanding led to a historic agreement. He demanded a reservation for his people in their traditional homeland. This was a crucial point for Cochise, as he wanted to ensure that the Apache could continue to live on the land that had sustained them for generations. The reservation was not just a place to live, but a symbol of their identity and heritage. General Howard, recognizing Cochise's influence and the futility of further bloodshed, agreed. The agreement marked a significant moment in the history of the Apache, as it provided a measure of security and stability for the tribe. It was a testament to Cochise's leadership and his ability to negotiate for the best interests of his people. The Chiricahua Apache Reservation was established in 1872, encompassing a vast swathe of land in southeastern Arizona. This land, rich in resources and deeply connected to the Apache's cultural heritage, became a sanctuary for the tribe. It was a place where they could rebuild and preserve their traditions. Cochise, weary of war and seeking a future for his people, had secured a temporary reprieve. The years of conflict had taken their toll, but the establishment of the reservation offered a glimmer of hope. Cochise spent his final years ensuring that his people could thrive in this new environment. He died on the reservation in 1874, a legend in his own time. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continued to inspire future generations of Apache leaders and warriors. His legacy as a warrior and a peacemaker would live on. Cochise's life story is a powerful reminder of the strength and resilience of the Apache people, and his contributions to their history are remembered and honored to this day.